So I want to welcome Rabbi Yehoshua Pfeffer. His bio went around on the Kesher Israel announcement about this event. So glad to see so many of you registered. It's Yom HaShoah Ugvura. It's Holocaust Remembrance and Heroism Day. And it's a time while we hope for the world to learn harmony and not discord after such a terrible event, we have noted that there is a little bit of discord among Jewish communities and Israelis, and that kind of permeates some of the thinking of everyday liberal Jews in America too. And so I want to welcome you in Brotherhood.
Scott, thank you so much, and happy to be in conversation, happy to meet the community, and thank you to each one of you who is joining us.
I think when we talk about lessons of Yom HaShoah, because it is, we should just take a moment and say that we know from the Gemara, Sinat Chinam, baseless hatred, really was the core problem that the Gemara says about the second Beit HaMikdash, the second temple. But I think what that translates to sometimes is easy othering. In other words, dehumanizing. And a lot of times with the liberal Jewish community, I have felt, start a conversation about Haredim, and we're very quick to dehumanize. And so I want to bring a human factor to this. And, Hashem, God, let's put God right into the mix, created this ability for human beings among Jews to even dehumanize. Does it happen on the Haredi side too? And what do you make of this kind of reality we face, that we've dehumanized each other in a certain sense?
Well, unfortunately, of course, it happens on all sides. And I think the Gemara you mentioned is a good place to start. The Gemara in Maseches Yoma speaks about the difference between the first temple and the second temple. The first temple was destroyed because of sins, because of sinfulness. The Gemara mentions the big three: idolatry, sexual transgressions, and murder. And the second temple, the Gemara says, people were righteous, and yet they had baseless hatred. And the Gemara asks, which one was worse? The Gemara says, well, we know the second one was much worse, because the first exile only lasted for 70 years, while the second one still going in the Talmudic times, and we're still not done yet. And the Vilna Gaon explains in a fascinating exposition. He says, what's the difference between the two? He says, in the first temple, their superficiality was bad. They were doing sins that were superficially bad, but inside they were good. And in the second temple, their superficiality was good. They were keeping the mitzvot on the superficial level, but their core was rotten. And that was expressed in baseless hatred, which expresses something rotten at the core. We don't appreciate that our core as Jews is common. We don't appreciate the blessings that we share. We don't appreciate the miracles that God sends for all of us. And specifically on Yom HaShoah, it's such a moment to recognize this, because sometimes people use the Shoah, the Holocaust, the Nazis, even in internal conversation. And that, I think, is tragic and is deeply skewed, deeply misguided. The Nazis were evil. They were our true enemies. We're not enemies. We might engage in dispute. We might have differences of opinion, certainly within Israel, about the vision for the Jewish state. But we need to be able to transcend those differences and engage in conversation in order that we'll be able to form a public space that we can all live with and reach those compromises. And unless we're able to face each other as colleagues, as friends, as brothers, then we won't be able to step forwards into the healthy and inclusive place that Israel needs to be for all of us.
You're making me think about, in terms of the Gemaras, that story and the breakdown of it all appears in Gittin, right? That we had to separate, that people were literally ripped apart. The relationships between brothers were ripped apart. Where does it say we'll start as enemies but end as lovers? In Kiddushin.
Well, that's
right. Bring them to the Beit Midrash.
Right.
Here
that's
we
true,
are.
but that's a base Midrash conversation. Meaning, and I appreciate that. I think that a lot needs to start from the study hall, from the rabbis, from the religious leaders. A lot needs to begin from there. That quote is a rabbinic quote. It's a quote of how should the Beit Midrash look. And the Beit Midrash needs to be a place that can handle deep differences within a framing that brings everyone together.
So let's take that in two directions to get right to the Israel issue. We see hundreds of thousands of people on the streets, not in the Beit Midrash. We see that if you will, the support and the love and the ongoing connection with the Holy Land of Israel is still happening in the Batei Midrash. People are busy studying, and they know and think about it as really adding to the incredible determination of the Jewish people to maintain our presence in the land of Israel. So there's the land of Israel and the state of Israel. And there are, as you write about, different publics. Your Tzarich Iyun blog went right into the issue that this Haredi community that you're a thought leader in is no longer a minority, that there are various, it doesn't have to be President Rivlin's only 4 categories, because that kind of puts it in too few number of columns. People are people, human beings are human beings, but they have different outlooks on the world. To steer into what's been going on recently, you've said this is not just a judicial reform issue. This is a lot of years in the making. Let me show you the fault lines in this, and let's understand those to get to the idea of Torah law and statecraft coming to work together to make for a better and distinct and unique future in the land. Now, before we get to that solution making and getting everybody back in there, maybe starting from a rabbinic text or maybe starting from the Declaration of Independence as a rabbinic text of sorts. Let's talk about where we are now, though. Why such a fractured society? How did we get here, in your estimation, from your vantage point as the thought leader in your community? What are you saying to your community, and how are we to understand what your community wants us in the, let's say, the more liberal camps? And I'll give you one phrase in Tel Aviv that I heard that said a lot about what you're up against. A taxi driver, and we all know we turn to taxi drivers sometimes to, get the bottom line. That's the joke around these parts when we travel there. He said, we will not be the chamor for the Mashiach. So people feel this sense, I think a little bit of the hatred that we were describing. And what we want to do is dialogue and bring it to this place of understanding each other. So what are we to understand about the differences in worldviews? And how does that inform and paint a picture of where we are now in your estimation, and give us a picture of where we are now? You live in Jerusalem.
Okay, so a lot to unpack there, Rabbi Scott. And let me just start by saying that the moment in Israel is a moment in which there is significant fear. There is significant concern, fear, anxiety. And even though it's a painful moment, it's a moment that you've described correctly as a moment that articulates tension, even animosity, and certainly fear. But nevertheless, I also think that it's a moment which is laden with opportunity. It's a challenge that it's about time that it's about time that these issues were actually brought up, surfaced, raised in again, I cannot agree with or vouch for the different statements that have been made, because some of them I find cross certain lines that I would much prefer would not be crossed. But nevertheless, if we speak about the issue itself, the issue is that after 70 years, 75 years of Israel's existence, during which a lot of different questions, issues, public kind of, I would say public matters of religion and state that were certainly present, but were to a large degree tucked under a certain public carpet, and there was no need to, as it were, get too much involved in them. Today we've reached a moment where there's no choice. Today we've reached a moment where that involvement has become crucial, almost existential to the future of the Jewish state. Now, why the moment now? What's happened? So what's happened is that, the Haredim, as the representatives of the religious right, if you want, the Haredim as representatives of a religious right. This is not the religious Zionist right, it's not the Ben Gvir religious right, but it's a representation of a religious right that sees Israel as a continuity to what there was before. From the Haredi perspective, their project of pioneering within the state of Israel is a project of continuity. It's a project of rebuilding everything that was decimated, destroyed in the Holocaust. Why is it that Haredim do not participate in Holocaust Memorial Day? I mean, surely you would expect the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredi society, to be the first to be the participants in the Memorial Day. And the answer to that is exactly in your introduction. It's not just a day of remembering the Holocaust, but rather it's Yom HaShoah veHagvura. And that Hagvura is there for a reason. It's there to say that never again will we tolerate the condition of powerlessness that we had before the state of Israel was established. This is a watershed moment. We're going into a new phase of Jewish existence, of Jewish power. And that Jewish power also constitutes a new type of Jewish individual who is not leaned over his lectern with his Talmudic tome. He's not somebody who is focused on religious service and prayer and devotion and so on. But rather, look at the posters that were up in the 40s in Israel to join the Haganah or to join the different groups that predated the state of Israel and so on. It's a muscular Jew. It's a Jew that works the land. It's a Jew that's modeled very often in those days on the kind of Russian archetype. It's a break.
So let me stop.
From that tradition.
Let me stop you and just say there are many who I'm sure are thinking, you'll permit me, but the Haredi world is not serving in that Haganah. The Haredi world is gaining the benefit of all of the pioneers who continued to do and continue to send their children to the army. And this is a big stopping point for a lot of people in listening to what's about to come next because of some of your developing thought about statehood and Torah craft.
Good. So let's unpack that. By the way, and a note to listeners: give me your hardest questions. I'm not shy. All good.
All respectfully and in the sense that we're building here. That's what we
Absolutely.
the dialogue for building and understanding.
Let's unpack that. Why is it that Haredim don't serve in the IDF? Is it because they're morally corrupt? Is it because they don't understand that there's a deep moral failing in benefiting from the defense of a country without contributing to it? So there's much to be said. That's a big discussion. But to give the kind of very brief introduction to that, I would say that the main issue over there is how the IDF was constituted, was conceived of by Ben Gurion himself. Ben Gurion, and this is explicit in many records, Ben Gurion saw the IDF as serving two basic purposes. One purpose, the defense of the state of Israel. That's a purpose we should all agree on. And there's no question that the IDF does a tremendous service. And we all need to express our deepest gratitude to every soldier, no question about that. But the IDF served the second purpose. And the second purpose was to mold, to be the crucible, to be the melting pot for the new Israeli Jew, explicitly so. And the Haredim were extremely extremely, I would say, reticent, reluctant, fearful, anxious to not be a part of that project of building the new Jew. For the Haredi individual to be in the IDF in those days, and we should speak about today too, because today things are different and it's not the same. But in those days, there were two issues. One issue was to rebuild the Torah Academy, and that's what Ben Gurion referenced explicitly when he gave the deferral to yeshiva students. He said, I understand that we need to rebuild the Torah academies, and therefore I'm happy to give this deferral. But the other issue, which is perhaps less spoken about, but was definitely very present, was to what degree can we, as Haredi Jews, as those who are trying to perpetuate rather than to break away from the old style European Judaism, to what degree can we participate in the project of state building, in the project of statecraft? And from the perspective of many within that community, the Orthodox or the ultra-Orthodox community, the answer was, we need to disassociate, or at the very least, we need to stand aside. We need to allow that project to develop and to be built by all of those pioneers, and we need to focus on our pioneering project. And Yom HaShoah is just a remarkable expression of that, because why shouldn't we? Why can't we all get together to remember, to mark the day of Holocaust Memorial as one nation together? And the answer is because it's not so simple, because each Memorial Day ceremony has within it a certain agenda. What is it that we learn from the Holocaust? Which direction do we take the Shoah to? And the classic narrative, the Ben Gurion, the general Israeli narrative, is the narrative of Gvura. Never again. We're now going to take matters in our own hands. We're not going to allow such a thing to happen. And the Haredim, even those like myself, who are looking for deeper collaboration, looking for deeper participation, need to tinker that. Meaning the message itself is not so simple. We look at it and we say, 1 second, how do we say that without falling into a place of koichi ve'otzem yodi, asu le'esachai lezeh? How do we fall?
That's a verse that means by my own strength and my own power, without God's quotient, I really established this state. I really achieved this success.
I take self-determination. How do you take self-determination while at the same time making space for God, making space for Hashem in that state, in that IDF? It's not a simple, it's not a simple question.
Let's bridge from there. Because again, the reason why we call this Eid Lavin is because I think you're hearing this, folks out there, that we need to really listen to what it means to have a day on the calendar that's very only decades old, and has in it certain meanings for certain groups in Israel, population of Haredi people who really feel like potentially the quotient, the God quotient, and the promise of being in Eretz Yisrael and rebuilding a renaissance of Jewish life in and of itself is somewhat challenged by being there. But there's this openness that Rabbi Pfeffer is explaining that.
Let me get to the moment.
Yeah.
Moment today. I was just on the way.
Right. So that's what I wanted to bridge it to. The moment today also, though, is about worldviews that don't come from the same place. There is the state stakeholders, and there are the Haredi investors in the renaissance of Jewish life, according to the way many see it. And the two never meet.
Well, let me get to this now, though, because I think that's important. And by the way, et lehavin is great. I would also, even before the lehavin, et lakshiv.
Yes, to pay attention deeply. We should pay attention to each other's
time for listening.
Narratives, words, explanations, answers.
Time for listening.
That's what we're doing.
So what happened since the time of Ben Gurion and the Haredi leadership then, the Chazon Ish, the Ger Rebbe, whoever it was, since that time, so Israel has developed along parallel tracks. You have the general building of Israel, building of the different institutions, building of the economy, building of the IDF, building of everything that Israel represents. And Israel is a miracle. Israel is a miracle. I think that we should all agree on that.
Amen.
As a starting position. But you know what? There's another miracle within Israel and that's the miracle of religious revival. Ben-Gurion was convinced that when he's giving these concessions to the Haredim, he's setting up a museum, at best, the vector, the direction of religion in the world, broadly speaking, generally, but also specifically within Judaism, was not towards greater religious observance, devotion, faith. It was very much the opposite. And so Ben-Gurion, from his perspective, this was at best a museum, but rather than becoming a relic, something residual, a museum, Jewish life, Orthodox Jewish life, Haredi Jewish life, has flourished to an extent that nobody could have dreamed of. And that's also kind of a miracle within a miracle. The yeshiva academies, the Hasidic courts, the synagogue, the Torah study, religious observance, the tshuva movement, all of these sprang from nowhere, from utter decimation, from utter destruction. And that gave a lot of space for both of these movements to progress and really along parallel lines. Now, it's true that the Haredim participated in government, but they were always small enough, and they were always, I would say, there were checks and balances internally within each government that ensured that the Haredim were limited, confined to their own kind of Daled Amot, their own 4 cubits of their little fiefdom within the state of Israel. And that was true pretty much until the present government. The present government doesn't include any of those checks and balances. The government is a fully right-wing government with Haredi parties, religious Zionist parties, and the Likud, which has become something of a traditional / soft religious party itself. It's not so dissimilar to Shas, just without the Haredi color, without the Haredi added value. And therefore, the current movement, the current government, has given the Haredim themselves a newly acquired power that transcends, it goes beyond their own little fiefdom within Israel, but also gives them an opportunity to bring that to bear both internally in a much greater way. Think about the draft law, think about a bunch of other laws, and also to influence Israel in a way that anybody outside this coalition is scratching their heads and saying, 1 second, what's going to happen? Where is Israel going to go? Is this coalition going to be able to maintain a modern, liberal democracy? And when you place into that equation the erosion of power from the Supreme Court, which is the other possible source of checks and balances, the Supreme Court, which has been very much a force for the liberal side, countering the Haredim and other less liberal influences within Israel. When you erode away that power, there's nothing left. There are no checks and balances. And that's why this is a moment, because it brings to bear the conflict. It brings to bear this cultural war, if you want, of where Israel is going to go. And I think, we're seeing the negative sides of it. I think the positive sides of it is it's going to force us to get into a room and to listen and to talk and to thrash out some way of compromise, some way of finding a means by which we'll all be able to look into the future in a way that will enable, facilitate everybody to go forward. The Haredim need to participate in Israel. It's essential for the future of Israel. But how does that participation look? How does it look from the Haredi side? How does it look from the non-Haredi side? From the non-Haredi side, the general invitation has been, come, participate, but please on our terms.
Give us some examples. What does that mean to the Haredi world? Come participate, but only on our terms.
That means, for example, be a part of academia, but be a part of academia without gender separation. Because we like academia with gender mixed. So be a part of academia, but without gender separation.
I've heard the same thing about vocational training centers.
Vocational
Do
training,
it together.
same thing.
But you believe, and in your writings, you believe there are groups within your community who would, if certain kinds of standards of religious, let's say, halakha, Jewish law, was really brought forward as possible within those spheres, they would participate more in civil society, including training for jobs, university level education, and the army.
So that's being done. It's being done on certain level. Each one of those is an issue in itself. There's education, there's higher education, there's workforce, and there's IDF. All of these are very important issues, and they all require work from the Haredi side, meaning the Haredim themselves certainly need to rethink their own participation in Israel on all of these, and each one is a different issue. But what I'm saying as an opening and kind of opening statement is that all sides need to think about this seriously, meaning how the Haredim will be able to participate in Israel in a serious way, including the IDF, of course, and including all of the other elements, is something that Israel broadly has to think about together. It needs this conversation to be had. And when we hear the more strident positions that are unwilling to entertain the other side, as it were, meaning, well, the Haredim don't serve in the IDF, so they're just evil.
I had one of those kind of comments just to give voice to it, and people feeling like you're pushing them left. I'm going,
here we go.
Because this touches nerves, and folks out there, I'm letting it touch nerves because I do believe that we really need to be in a moment of lakshiv, of pay deep attention and deep listening, and feel our brothers and sisters' pain at the same time that we stand up for values we believe in, so that we could have the same space to pray in an egalitarian way where we want to in the land of Israel, have educational opportunities that are open doors for everybody, every Jew around the world, and do it in the kind of groups we want to bring children. But I think we're trying to really understand what it means to have this new land of Israel as land of opportunity from a Haredi perspective, and build a state and go forward. And that's why, like, Joe, I saw you right. You're right. I don't understand how Haredis still feel justified not to participate in the army today, even given the historical claims. And as I said, like, someone's being kind of like,
I'd be happy to take all
push
all
forward,
questions.
but
Take questions
those specific issues we may not get to, but the larger issue here is to continue unpacking what has been under that public carpet that Rabbi Pfeffer said, and why this moment in politics needs a push into the middle. And I'm going to go there. We heard you say several times that the most extremist voices are really creating the potential for violence that people were worried about. Civil war. Terms like civil war were used by many, many thinkers who we met on the UJA clergy mission.
Yes.
That's a scary moment for Jews.
Yes.
The idea, if I can, that there's a blueprint in the Tanakh may be too religious an idea for some, but for us, let's say even we get some idea of religious blueprints from our sources. The idea that the split in the kingdom would be a forewarning to us about where this could go, because taxes, Shlomo taxed some people and others tried to skirt them. Let's say, we could say a midrashic take on what happened there. They didn't want to pay the taxes. And then the two kingdoms were thrust into a north-south existence after a unity of only a short time, while David HaMelech sat in Jerusalem. David sat in Jerusalem, unified the people, but it failed. There are people existentially worried these days that we are not getting to this stuff immediately enough. But your notion, I think, calls for a little bit of a longer investment in how Torah law and the God promise and statecraft and modern state building really work. And I've come up with this term in my mind, and I want you to react to that, but also this kind of scenario I've painted, that we need not only the embrace of the difference, but somehow a system to engage in it, which is broken down entirely. I find when we put Israeli politicians in the room, that emotion takes over these days. Have you seen a framework within Haredi thought that says, get to the table, that you're putting out in your community to say, we need to really hear, though, the folks who don't want to have gender separation, and how to work out with, if we want that and they don't, how to live in that space. If they are expecting a little bit more by way of national service, a year of service, if it's not IDF soldiers right away, so that people give a year to the state in some way that still allows them to study. Are there immediate solutions available, or is this all thought construct?
So I would say a couple of things in response. First of all, the civil war kind of rhetoric, I take some offense actually at the civil war rhetoric. I think that it underestimates the feeling of brotherhood that still pervades in much of Israel. I'm a person that has a lot of different interactions within Israeli society. I teach at Hebrew University in a completely secular environment. I'm a part of Haredi society in the ultra-Orthodox world. My community in Israel is an English-speaking community, which is very diverse from modern Orthodoxy to other parts of the Orthodox world. I think that underlying these very powerful expressions of a conflict of values, which is where we need to really engage in conversation, I think that still underlying that is a sense of brotherhood, is a sense of togetherness. I cannot stand this incendiary kind of speech that says, oh, tomorrow we'll be taking arms against one another, and I appreciate that Jewish history is not without models in which that has happened. Whether it's the tribe of Benjamin in Pelegish Begiva, and whether it's the split of the North and South Kingdom, and whether it's the Biryonim that you mentioned in Maseches Gittin, in the destruction of the Second Temple. So I'm not saying we don't have models for that. I do think that specifically at times like this, on Yom HaShoah, with the memory of the Shoah so fresh in our own minds, few decades, I think that we still have a deep feeling of togetherness and brotherhood, that we're able to set that feeling aside in order to have a good fight, and for good reasons. But these are big issues, but I think the civil war kind of incendiary talk is unreflective of what Israeli society is really about. And that's my optimist speaking, and I was,
Maybe it's why we enjoy each other's company.
Okay.
I'm the optimist in that
Good.
too, and
good.
that gets us to though
Good. Now,
immediate versus
now
long
question
term.
of immediate.
How are you sharing your thought, and where is this going? And are there models in text to start from the Beit Midrash?
So first of all, there are a lot of programs, initiatives, projects, institutions already in place. I'm on the executive board of Netzach Yehuda. Netzach Yehuda is an organization that supports Haredim who are serving in the IDF. We have 20,000 alumni, 20,000 veterans of soldiers who served in the IDF and are now a part and parcel of Israeli society. All of them hailed from Haredi society. To what degree did they remain Haredi the way they were brought up is, of course, very much dependent on the individual case. Not all of them are still, with Payas and Estrimo. But nevertheless, that exists, meaning the track exists. Is the track broad enough? Is the track populated enough? No, for a variety of reasons. But as an institution, as a concept, the idea of Haredim serving in the IDF is not foreign. There are thousands of Haredim today, not many thousands, serving in the IDF in a variety of units. There's a whole battalion, which is a Haredi battalion. Gdud Netzach Yehuda is a Haredi battalion. And other Haredim are serving everywhere. There are Haredi women who are serving in the IDF. Shushu, this is hashtag. They're serving as computer programmers, as cybersecurity people.
So do you think that right now we could build on those institutions? Do you think a centrist government, let me put it to you
But
like
let,
this.
let me just say another word on that. Building on those institutions requires change. It's not, those have been around for a while and they still require scale. They're not scaled enough.
Right.
And that's certainly true for IDF. It's certainly true for workforce participation of Haredi men. It's certainly true for core curriculum in the Haredi schools that isn't being studied. All of those are in place. We have mechanisms, we have institutions, we have beginnings. But nevertheless, that requires a lot of scaling up. That scaling up isn't a work of a movement. It's a work of mindset. It's a work of how we think. It's a work of bringing together these different pioneering projects that were begun so long ago and thinking, all right, how do we turn it into one project that we can all be invested in a serious way? And that's not
so
a
let me
project
go back to my question
for tomorrow. And by the way, I will say, just sorry.
No, it's all right.
I
Because
know
I
I'm
want
taking
to
so
tell
long.
you that I think that part of the issue is that right now, with such a right-wing government, and you even alluded to it, and the Haredim, by way of all journal articles that I read, kind of stepped back from the front lines of these arguments
Yes.
in a rightful way, because they
Yes.
realized this kind of government may be not able to get these things through because of the far rightism of some of what is both considered non-democratic and racist. So let's hit the centrist government that could be organized, whether it's Gantz, whether the polls now say there's not a lot of support for this government. All indications are after 5 of them, why not have another? We're headed towards some kind of election or some deep
Attention.
compromise. But where does the scaling start for 1 million plus Haredim? And is it the government of a Ben Gvir, or is it the government of a Gantz? Because it seems like there's a lot of puppetry going on in the current government with leaders and Netanyahu's place.
Right. So the truth of the matter is that it doesn't start not from Ben Gvir and not from Gantz and not from Netanyahu and not from Yair Lapid and not from the Haredi politicians. It starts from the people. And that's the truth of the matter, what we truly need. What we truly need in Israel is a civic-based, a movement of the people. That's the only healthy place by which this movement, this process can actually develop from. It can't develop from politics. Politics has to be the end game of this movement, the final kind of representation, the final expression of this Haredi kind of course towards greater participation while maintaining core values. That should ultimately be expressed in a new kind of Haredi politics that is somewhat different to what we have today. But in order to get there, that's not going to come from not the Ben Gvir side and not from the Gantz side. It's going to come from the people. It needs an internal civic motion, civic movement that people begin to think, where do I want my kids to go to school? People begin to think, I want to take responsibility for my family by working because that's dignified. People begin to think that there is something morally deeply problematic in enjoying the defense of others while not participating yourself. And how can we move to rectify that, notwithstanding the narratives and notwithstanding the challenges? That can only come from the people. Ultimately, and this, I don't remember who it was that said that the politics is downstream from the culture, but the culture meaning the way people think. And therefore, yes, the Haredim were right to step down from the high horse of judicial reform, but that's their pragmatic instincts. Haredim are very pragmatic. That's what sets them sometimes aside from the religious Zionists, the more, some will say, messianic types. That's not Haredism. The Haredim are pragmatic. They realize when something is going too far and it's not going to achieve its goal, and therefore they know when to step back. That's a healthy pragmatism, and I think that's something which we should be thankful for. In fact, when this government was formed, I'm on air saying this, that I think the Haredim could step up to be the mevugar ha'achra'i, the responsible adult in this government. I don't think that's happened, and for whatever reasons, and no need to dwell on the politics too much. But certainly, I think that these developments need to happen. We have to step up the pace. My problem is the pace. It's nice to have these beginnings, but we need to scale them up. Scaling them up requires speeding up the pace of the social movement that comes from the people. And like I sometimes say, we need a little help from our friends. Little help from our friends means, yes, the Netanyahus and the Gantzes and the governments and whoever it is, they can provide some help, some support, some kind of some good incentives. Okay, so these are useful. We need help from our friends, but the real change in the Haredi sense has to come internally. And I would say the same thing for our liberal friends, meaning for them too, to think about how do they conceive integrating a participant Haredi society without being condescending, without saying all the values, we know the values, we are the enlightened ones, we are the people of light, and you guys are the people of darkness, and you guys need to participate in the workforce because we need people paying taxes, but in terms of values, we know the truth, we know the light, like many say. And this doesn't help. This is unhelpful. If it's coming from a place of arrogance and condescension, it's not going to work.
The right passions, the right personalities, and creating a pragmatism of possibility is what I hear you talking about. And I know that some people are reactive. We know that. We know it's in the Jewish people's nature, as you said, set aside the Brotherhood to have a good argument. Some people feel it more than just an argument in their bones, like they know that this is exactly what you should be doing, and folks on the other side too.
Correct.
Say the same. So we know that, but it sounds like you're invested in this. You founded this blog. Talk to me about the particulars of if you think the blog as an instrument is going to move this thinking, this thought, these kinds of frameworks forward. Talk to me about why you chose to start a blog as a Haredi guy who's going to get a lot of pushback in your own community for getting on that computer line and sharing this. Talk about your being here and why you're doing outreach in the world of pluralistic egalitarian Judaism. So let's not just take for granted that you're here. And again, I want to appreciate you for it. At the same time that we want you to hear how frustrating it is sometimes for us that there's not an egalitarian space to pray, or there's not institution building on behalf of a different expression of Judaism within the state of Israel, which again, you said you're paying attention deeply and listening. So I send you back with that, but that's not to derail your project of really creating a pragmatism of possibility within Haredi politics itself, which people may not seem to have patience for and may want to say something in that vein, like we're not patient for all that, it's going to take too long. But on the other hand, you're really invested in this. I know. I heard that the first time I met you in Jerusalem.
And the truth is, I'm sympathetic to people who say, hey, we don't have patience. But I still think it's helpful. It's not like I'm not empathetic with that. And I'm happy to speak about the Kotel and spaces.
But let's talk about the
I'm happy to talk
is
about
this going to
So
help
Tzarachin is a
your
journal.
thought?
Tzarachin is a journal. It's a journal of thinking.
It's a journal.
Yes, it's a journal of thought. It's a print journal. Its main audience is online, and it's a journal that its basic message is we need to be investing real thought in our place within Israel. That includes a range of internal issues within Haredi society, and it includes a range of issues that are at the seam between the rest of Israel and the Haredim. And this was something novel. There was never such a journal around, because the general attitude is we don't think about these things. We don't engage. This is up to the rabbis and the political leaders who are speaking to the rabbis. And this blog said, you know what? With respect and deference, of course, to rabbinical authorities, there are many Haredim who need a new language. They need a new way of expressing their both views and their concerns and their aspirations. And if you're not able to articulate your own kind of social mechanism, beliefs, way of life in a language that can be in conversation with everything else that's going on in Israel, then we won't be able to make that progress. And that's what the journal comes to do. How much change can a journal make? Well, it depends what else you have. Meaning, together with the journal, we run educational programs. People that come in, younger, older, Haredi participants who are out there. There are many who want to be participant. There are many who deeply care, but they don't necessarily have the toolkit, whether it's in terms of languages, whether it's in terms of knowledge, whether it's in terms of awareness of everything that's going on. And therefore, we run educational programs. Some call them leadership programs for Haredi men and women who are interested to play a deeper role in that way. We're now invested in a magazine because, a journal is nice, it's high culture, but it's not good enough. You need to create identity, you need to create following. So you need to have a magazine also, something that will speak on a kind of lower cultural level, but with the same messaging. We have a literary supplement because you need literature that reflects what's actually going on in Haredi society. Too much of our literature is deeply censored, and you need some less censored Haredi literature about what's actually going on. So to which degree do these things make an impact? I think to a large degree, but not an immediate impact. This is not a campaign, meaning you can campaign for a certain position or for a certain action, and do a 6-month intensive, everybody, buy this product or do this action. But this is deeper. It's about ways of thought and patterns of thought and mindsets and internal motions and questions of responsibilities and how do you envisage this Haredi society that is integrated? It's a big deal.
It's a beautiful project you're engaged in, and I want to say that we would hope that in times to come, the Karov B'Yamim, soon to come, we see that the unrest and the need to take to the streets in Israel stops, and that we can harness a little bit more of these possibilities for society. I think that folks need, having just heard what the journal was about and the culture building and the new vision of politics that does touch on that border of the modern state of Israel from a standpoint of this God-given gift of the land of Israel back to Abraham and Sarah and the notion of Torah-based society, we really do get a sense that your optimism and your hope could lead to some cultural productivity and transmission and bring people into dialogue. And the hope stands for to use the terms, the left and folks who don't come from the same worldviews and points of view, that they would be able to create that pragmatic, purposeful way forward for a unique state of Israel. Last question
and let us
about
say,
the
Amen.
Declaration of Independence.
Yes.
Because the Israeli Declaration of Independence is really a document of statecraft.
Yes.
And I want you to react to this one paragraph, and then
Sure.
we're going to open it up to a few questions. This paragraph says the state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles, as we discussed. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. And just to that point, it will foster development for all its inhabitants.
Yes.
And I don't want to leave out that I was in a cab going to the Kofar Carmel in Haifa to the beach to catch the train back to Jerusalem. And the Druze driver said to me, "Boy, you guys are making a mess of things." I was in the Air Force, and
That's funny.
boy, I'm ready to go be a pilot. Can't believe it. And also, he said between the fellow Druze community members, Arab residents up there in Haifa, where the project is going somewhat decently still, and Lod, we met people on the UJA clergy mission who were working together with Haredi women and Arab women to do vocational training.
Right.
But again, population and numbers wise, we only hope it grows. But how do you react to saying we're also the stewards of the land of Israel in the current scenario for all the land's inhabitants, including the Arab community,
Right.
and including any of the immigrants? And where those lines are drawn, of course, by way of laws, that's a separate issue. But I'm just talking on the theoretical. Does your politics reach into those areas, or are you just starting and need to really focus on this Jewish state?
Well, I think it's important to make a separation, a distinction between this statement that speaks about individuals, individual rights, individual liberties, the lives of individual, and the broader framing of the state of Israel as a Jewish state. I think that a very large majority within Israel supports a Jewish state, rather than a neutral state, a state of all its inhabitants.
Without the Jewish flavor, in law or not in law.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. Supports a Jewish state. It's a Jewish state which the Declaration of Independence assumes a Jewish state. That is the broader statement made in the Declaration of Independence, is that we're setting up a Jewish state, but one that respects the different life choices and the different identities of the citizenship within this Jewish state. I grew up in England. Britain is a Christian state. There's no separation, right? The Church of England is the church official of England. The flag of England is a flag that includes the cross, the symbols of England, the days of rest of England, and so on and so forth. So we live within a state that is a Jewish state. Now, there are different visions among the Jews of Israel of how that Jewish state needs to be constituted. What does it mean to be a Jewish state? So we have status quo arrangement, but the status quo arrangement isn't hallowed. It doesn't have kedusha. We don't have a constitution to speak of. If we would, then the constitution would actually unpack some of that. What does it mean to have a Jewish state? But in the absence of a constitution, and with a status quo which is coming apart at the seams from a whole host of different sides, whether it's public transportation on Shabbat, and whether it's some of the Haredi issues that have also come up. So we need, I think each group, listen, there were two individuals that came up with a document which has been labeled the Covenant of Gabis and Medan. I don't know if you've heard of this.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth Gabis, who I taught together with her on her course. I was her TA for 3 years, teaching her course on Jewish.
Ruth Gabis has been writing about the transformation necessary on the Supreme Court level for a long time in Israel, and Aleha Shalom. And
she was a remarkable person.
I'm indebted to Shelley Adler, who further deepened my familiarity with her work here in our community.
Okay.
And she's, let's just say, a liberal, and worked deeply in this judicial reform. But these two people made some kind of manifesto.
So Ruth Gabis, together with Rav Yaakov Medan, and I'm close with both of them. Ruth Gabis, of course, Aleha Shalom, who was just a remarkable woman, and Rav Medan, who I have deep respect for, and they came up with this very impressive document. But you know what? It wasn't accepted by anybody. And why not? Because it represented two individuals. We need to get together as groups with representatives to thrash out, how do we envisage the common Jewish space that we can all be comfortable with, given the fact that there are so many different groups. Now, once we come up with such a document, will that be hallowed forever? No, of course, a changing demographic might mean that there's a need for tweaking, and demographics can go either way, as the United States and its pendulum swings demonstrate, and that's fine. We need to have a certain dynamism there, but first of all, let's get together.
Listen, I think our community is hopeful that it can be a more pluralistic Judaism, or pluralistic Jewish homeland that we see come into our focus in these dialogues first. I agree with you that if it's not people on the ground and around the world, which we are here in the diaspora, of course, we recognize that, but we're actually feeling blessed for the inclusion. I felt very blessed as part of this UJA clergy mission that so many folks wanted to download with us and imagine and reimagine what's going on there. In terms of reimagining the Judaism, I am very impressed that you're willing to see social structure, social engineering of folks with very different opinions come together to try to flesh that out and not attach kedusha to what's current and what could be the next day, the tomorrow, as we really build a life, a shared space for Jewish expression and for all of the inhabitants there. Getting back to drilling down, I'm going to take Jay's question, and then I'm going to encourage you to write any last questions you have in the chat while Rabbi Pfeffer addresses Jay's question about the Supreme Court. Do you have in mind a mechanism that can effectively deal with the conundrum? Let's just drill back down to that one issue that seemed to start all this,
Supreme Court issue.
the Supreme Court issue.
To deal with the conundrum posed by the Supreme Court.
Having arrogated unto itself a semi-legislative.
Right. The Supreme Court. Right. What is too far? The Supreme Court. First of all, I have some experience with the Supreme Court. I clerked at the Supreme Court for a year, and I've kept up in my legal work with the Supreme Court. One of the main problems of the Supreme Court is the lack of diversity within the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has always been a very, I would say, homogeneous environment, and its values have been very liberal values. By the way, as are many Supreme Courts. I don't think Israel is such an exception. Where Israel was slightly exceptional was the scope of the Supreme Court's activism that really penetrated many, many layers of Israel's kind of sovereign or ruling infrastructures, whether it's the legislative, whether it's the executive, whether it's appointments, whether it's deals made by the government, like the gas deal, and whether it's other areas that might be more subtle, but still have very strong, are still very strongly influenced by the values of the Supreme Court. So, you know, that's where this whole reform agenda came from. Of course, it went too far and too fast, and it wasn't done in the way it should have been done. How do I envisage coming out from this in a positive way? Well, first of all, some appointments to the Supreme Court that will diversify the Supreme Court. Even before we tinker with the system, the very diversity within the Supreme Court of differences of both worldview and sector within Israeli society, that itself will make the Supreme Court less of a menace, less of a kind of threat in the eyes of many. That's number one. Number two, I think that we don't have a constitution, but we need some kinds of rules of engagement on what to expect in terms of Supreme Court intervention, Supreme Court striking down or being involved. Because right now, you know, things are too much up to the courts. The court can really decide to get involved wherever it wants and not. And that just we need clarity on that. There's no clarity there. And the third thing I would mention is the legal advisory. The legal advisory really have become a kind of power source unto itself as a representative of the Supreme Court. And often this has been crippling for ministers and for government officials. And that requires, again, just needs clarity. Ministers that want to push a certain agenda, that should be their right. If the Supreme Court wants to strike it down, let the court strike it down, but it shouldn't be blocked before it can even receive traction by the legal advisor.
Rabbi Pfeffer is describing a legal review that happens for legislative work before any kind of challenge to the legislation happens, and the Supreme Court would adjudicate the matter.
So those are three, I think, just basic points that are important to air and to deal with. And like I said, you know, the Yariv Levin and Simcha Rothman and so on, their reform agenda dealt with these points, but in obviously in a very aggressive way. I'm hoping that now that we're actually talking, and there's a certain hiatus, we'll be able to reach an effective compromise and a solution that will and enable moving forward in an effective way.
So, Arthur, I see that you've got a note about UJA's support of those Israeli NGOs who provide vocational training, the Haredi men. And I don't know if you have personal connection with those, but that's a wonderful kind of source of support and inspiration to know about.
So absolutely. So first of all, that's true. The UGA is involved in certain programs concerning vocational training, specifically in the computer world, trying to get more Haredim into high tech. I would say that's been a success, but a modest success. It's been a success in the fact that these programs exist, and there are many who want to participate in them, and that itself, speaks volumes. It's highly significant. The big question is the scale, meaning insofar as these programs remain boutique programs, then it won't be enough to create a kind of critical mass for Haredi society broadly to say, wow, like I see this is working, I'm going to join this, it's meaningful, and so on and so forth. You have to reach a critical mass that takes these programs and initiatives beyond the kind of boutique level and through to something bigger that can really present itself as a movement. It's something that people will say, wow, I'm going to join that. That's deeply meaningful. I understand where this is coming from. I see these role models, multiple role models, and that's what we need. So I'm deeply supportive, first of all. I think it's wonderful that Jews in America recognize the need and the importance of these initiatives. And I think the scaling up will come. We need the supply side, meaning the supply side of these initiatives, of these programs, of these workplace, let's say, endeavors alongside others, schools and so on. And we also need the demand side meaning people's mindset, people's thinking, people's attitude in a civic sense, in a responsibility sense, and so on. And so I would say they've been effective, but there's a lot more work to do.
You're growing that. And as a matter of closing today and thanking everyone for participating and everybody for being here. And we did a flash Zoom event here and we have a wonderful turnout. It was great that you registered for this between last night and this morning's email. I'm going to quote Rabbi Pfeffer from the blog or from the journal entry.
I'm not offended.
I'm sorry, but it's a deeply thoughtful journal. Yet deep in our hearts, we all know this is impossible. In other words, to live only in the 4 amot of halakha, as he said, the small framework of Torah law. The sheer size of the Haredi public does not allow its confinement to the 4 cubits of a halachic space, and the demands made by the general public to participate in the different areas of state function resonates with ever-increasing intensity, both morally and existentially. We are in an existential moment. There is a moral opportunity. I must wish you a blessing for the work, for the cultural productivity you're hoping for the pragmatism of possibility that we called out. We said it's an 8 lakshiv, 8 lahavin, to pay attention deeply, to understand. I would add to that now, in terms of those Hebrew words that we have, hakshava, havana, pay attention, understand, v'hakdama, and that we want to see progress soon and in our times. So, Raim Tovim, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi Pfeffer, for being with Or Zarua.
Thank you all the best.